Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, a mindset and body image coach, and as a Women's Fitness Academy educator, as you would know. And today I have a lovely woman sitting, I was going to say sitting by my side, but you're like sitting in front of me because we're virtually doing this podcast. Her name is Sarah Hopkins. And for those who don't know Sarah, she is a fertility health and endo support expert. Now, Sarah also has a qualification with Check. If you guys don't know who Paul Check is, please make sure that you Google or check him on Instagram. He is one phenomenal smart man and a very fit man too. But anyway, Sarah is also a lifestyle and nutrition coach with over a decade's experience working with women's health and fertility. Sarah, thank you so much for being here, babe.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm really happy to open this conversation with you today about fertility. And I know you're very big around holistic health as well. And I would love for you to shed some light to our listeners on how can holistic approaches support them when they're facing fertility struggles or even like hormonal imbalances.
Yeah, so obviously, when it comes to fertility, I think that we often do, if there are struggles, the first thing that the mind goes to is IVF or, a conventional medical approach. And, I think that that's pretty common these days. And of course, there is value in that. But, the great thing about taking a holistic approach, and definitely for all of those listeners, if you haven't checked out Paul Check, definitely check him out because he is a literal guru. Like, his wealth of knowledge is vast and expansive, and his way of articulating things is astounding. And he is continues to be my mentor. So thankfully I was able to work with him and really learn what holistic health actually means, to bring it back to the question. So, the problem with, I suppose, more allopathic approaches to health, which means treating symptoms with medication, or more traditional approaches or conventional approaches like that. So what a holistic approach will do, which is what my master, Paul Check, not that he's my master, that's a terrible word, but my guru has taught me, is it will look at what the root cause of a condition is. So if we look at fertility or endometriosis, it's about investigating what is at the root of that and then addressing that through nutrition and lifestyle. And of course, that is a more whole way of looking at something, rather than, for instance, let's just do IVF, rather than exploring what is causing this woman to struggle with infertility and how can we support that woman through nutrition, through lifestyle things like sleep hygiene and stress management and exercise modalities and all of the other things to really help her to embody more fertility, better health. And if she still needs to do the IVF, then it's actually just complementary to that because it's going to improve the outcome anyway. So for me, looking at a woman and thinking about supporting her holistically is just, it's a no-brainer. Like, it should be where everybody starts and finishes, and anything that they do in addition to that should really just be complementary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I wholly agree with what you have said. And as you mentioned, like, there is a point in life where if you are checking all the boxes that you're doing through nutrition and lifestyle, and something yet isn't happening, even though I would like to disagree, as you mentioned, there's always a root cause to the issue. People tend to go down that route of IVF. And again, it's up to that individual. However, with most cases, we notice when we're looking at the nutrition, we're looking at their lifestyle holistically as a whole, we always are able to find those gaps of what's actually happening and holding themselves back in terms of like the fertility and the hormonal imbalances. And something that has really opened my eyes in the last couple of years is noticing a lot of hierarchy people in the fitness and health industry who are going down the IVF route, but then noticing their lifestyles, which are not healthy. Most of them are bodybuilders. We know bodybuilders are not a sign of health. Some of them, get Botox. They use toxic makeup. They live an unhealthy lifestyle. They vape, they smoke, they drink. So it's just like, cool, like what aspects in life can you actually start regulating and becoming more healthier to have a better approach to, becoming more fertile and conceiving. And this might be a little bit of a harsh reality for some people who are doing this right now. And this is not a go at you going, you're a bad person for doing this. It's going, oh, okay, well, if I'm wanting to change something, maybe it's actually looking and taking responsibility, going, okay, I need to make these changes within myself and then look at the other approaches.
Totally. And you know what, like on that point, like especially, relative or relevant to the fitness industry, I think there's sort of a disconnect with a lot of people around what healthy, especially from a hormone balance and fertility perspective, what healthy looks like and what it actually is. Like, especially from that, a woman with visible abs is in many instances really just not representative of a fertile feminine body, because the body fat level is way too low. There has been a degree of like deprivation that has occurred to allow that shape of body to be present in a female form, and then obviously layering on that, what a healthy woman or a desirable woman is meant to look like in this day and age, which is a lot of, not for everybody, I'm generalizing, but it's fairly commonplace, right? Like you just said, like the fillers, the Botox, maybe some boobs added in, all of these cosmetics, all of these things actually interfere, like extreme dieting, over exercising, looking that way. All of these things actually make it harder for a woman to conceive, make it harder for her to have a healthy balance of hormones, make it more likely that she will struggle with something chronic like endometriosis. So it's sort of ironic because that is posted on social media as sort of the ideal and a representation of beauty and also health, and it's actually incongruent with what is actually synonymous with health, and what is synonymous with health is actually what is going to facilitate conception and a healthy pregnancy and a baby. So I think a lot of women actually come to that impasse when they do discover that maybe they're infertile or they're having fertility issues, and some struggle with it and others sort of embrace it and do what is required, like you were talking about, Siggy. But yeah, that's such an important and interesting point to bring.
It's a huge point because, and I mention this all the time in my mentorship when I speak and coaches, this is what's wrong with the health and fitness industry. You have this perception that a woman has to be with a six-pack looking shredded. Realistically, that is not a way of living.
No, do you know that one of my mentors, I like to call my mentors, Paul Check's a literal mentor, but I like to call mentors anybody that has influenced me has significantly influenced me on my journey, that any sort of thought leader. So Nat Kringoudis is, I don't know if you've heard of her, but we
literally did a podcast not long ago. She is a gun.
I love the emojis.
I didn't even realize that was, you just did one too.
Yeah, check it out. And we'll stop after this. There's all sorts.
Oh my God, this just made my day.
There's balloons too. Maybe balloons is like two fingers. Oh, there you go.
Wow. Okay, for those who are not watching, you'll have to watch the YouTube clip now because there's certain graphics that come up when we do certain movements with our hands. Just FYI.
Yes, balloons and love hearts and thumbs up and sprinkles. So yes, check out the video. But okay, so Nat Kringoudis actually said this to me, and I don't always use it because it's not always 100% accurate, but I think that it is. It's really good if you are sort of talking to a really motivated girl who has sort of come from that world where, you know, I see a lot of women that have come from that figure fitness world. So they're really indoctrinated into all of that. And it is like really trying to reprogram, you know, to really get them to understand you got to eat more. So she says, and this might be a TCM thing, a traditional Chinese medicine, that your ideal weight for conception to occur is your height minus 100. So if you're 165 centimeters, you should be 65 kilos. And, you know, that will often be sort of striking for those girls because they are sitting significantly below that usually in terms of their weight, unless they're like unless they have super high sort of muscle density. So that's just a good little rule of thumb to have a think about, you know, and sort of brings them back into reality and what they might need to do to just sort of start to embody, you know, I mean, if you think about the childbearing hips and like some of those old mythologies around feminine bodies, they just weren't a body that was ripped like that. And I think that that's not just some weird historical accident. Like that's a feminine body needs, a fertile body needs to be a little bit softer.
Yeah. And again, it's just having more of those conversations with women to making them realize, hey, you constantly wanting to diet and look, your thinnest way isn't really serving you. And to be honest, it hasn't served a purpose, a positive purpose for anyone till, yes, you go on stage, you do a photo shoot, you win a medal or a trophy or whatever. But like, what are the consequences after that? You lose your period. You become depressed, you're anxious. The amount of clients that have come to me after competing with binge eating disorders, it's just like, come on, like, why are we still in this loop of constantly wanting to attract this way of looking? And like you said, a fertile body doesn't look like that. So it's like us changing that narrative for them.
And, you know, I've been working with women and fertility for a decade, and some of the most challenging clients, not challenging for me, but them having challenges with their fertility, they come from a figure fitness background or they come from a disordered eating background. And obviously, let's face it, I mean, most of us have something in, you know, some skeleton in the closet because we were just indoctrinated into this diet culture. So, you know, it is really important to talk about it, and it is extremely common, and it is probably one of the big elephants in the room when it comes to infertility. And, you know, to bring it back to holistic health, you can walk into an IVF clinic and they're literally not going to even ask about any of that. That is not important to them. They might see the pathology of like things not working. They might not see any pathology, and they might just have an unexplained infertility diagnosis. There it goes again, sprinklers. It's inappropriate sometimes, the emojis that come down. But yes, they don't really understand that what is underpinning that motivation to go to the clinic is actually all that stress that the body has been subjected to over all of those years, and it probably just needs some love and some food and some nourishment, and that will be enough to support it to, you know, conceive and hold a pregnancy.
Yeah, you made such a good point around this. And again, hopefully this is like opening some eyes to some of the women going, oh, okay, well, if I'm struggling with these certain areas with my fertility, maybe have a look at your life holistically. And are you actually ticking all these boxes? If not, what ways can you better? What changes can you make? And you know what? With the vast majority of the information that we have these days, it is so useful to be able to change, you know, your home products, your makeup, your shampoo, your conditioner. Like, oh, it's beyond me, like how much stuff we can actually improve these days. But again, it takes up to you, the person, to make those changes instead of just a quick fix of a pill.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there is so much information out there, but I feel like sometimes there's too much information out there, you know, like it is hard to know where to start and what to do. I mean, particularly with the detoxing, like the low tox stuff, I feel like that's overwhelming for a lot of people. And, you know, I would typically recommend not even, I mean, do that if it's within your capacity to do that. But like, there's so many other things you can also do that will be profound in the impact that they're going to have on your fertility, like making sure that you're nourished, making sure that you're eating enough food, making sure that you're eating enough protein, making sure that you're getting good quality sleep, you know, lots of other things, you know, making sure that you're getting sunlight during the day. They seem like simple things as well, but those are the things that are actually profound when they're done consistently over time. You're understanding because you're like a mindset coach as well. And
Literally.
and so much of it is also that, like managing stress, like being conscious of the programming of like what you're telling yourself every day, all of that stuff is so important as well.
I just want to be truthful here right now. And I love the fact that you've brought this up, Sarah, because I just had a call with a client and they were saying how overwhelmed they felt and there was a lot of resistance around, you know, their health and so forth. And it's such a beautiful way to experience and for them to notice these challenges coming up, because she has this self-awareness right now of what's been holding her back. But we've also been able to do a list of what are the things that she needs to put into place to make herself better. And like you said, it's like getting the sunshine, eating a nourishing meal, all these things. Like we know what we need to do. However, sometimes we choose not to, whether it is or whatever cycle of, you know, thinking you're in, whether it's a self-sabotage way of thinking. So again, like you mentioned, yeah, sometimes it could be overwhelm of too information, or is it like, are you not taking enough personal responsibility regarding it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a coach, and you're the same, like that's the biggest thing that I see is, you know, I mean, fertility probably helps with that because it gives women something that is bigger than themselves, that really like provides an extra push of motivation. But obviously, yeah, that does still happen, that self-sabotage, that negative self-talk, or just focusing on what isn't working rather than focusing on what is, or thinking that it's too simple, that they want to complicate it, that this doesn't, you know, like wanting things to be like a laundry list and 1,000 supplements and all of those things, you know, rather than being, oh, like, why don't I just put my bare feet on the ground for 10 minutes every day and, you know, turn off all electronics and get out of all the blue light, you know, for 3 hours before bed. Like those things can almost be harder.
Mm-hmm. But they're the most simplest thing to do.
They're the things, like especially the light, the being outside, you know, eating regularly, like all of those things, because we are cyclic beings and our cycles are literally cyclical, that, you know, those things create the circadian rhythm and that ties us into the lunar rhythm, and that's all part of us being, you know, part of the cycle of nature, and that is going to help us be more fertile.
Amen to that. Speaking of fertile and, you know, fertility side of things, we know that certain imbalances around our hormones can also be viable around endometriosis. And I'm sure you've seen plenty of cases where a lot of women suffer pain when it's associated with endo. And I know whatever we've been talking about right now in terms of like their lifestyle practices to alleviate this pain, but what are some other innovative strategies that can help, you know, this particular individual with endo?
So again, like I don't know if innovative is the right word that I would use to sort of think about the strategies. And maybe it's going to sound, hopefully it's not going to sound repetitive, but like with endo, it's an autoimmune condition. it's an inflammatory autoimmune condition where the body is basically attacking the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, and actually it sometimes extends out into ovaries and large bowel and other parts of that sort of pelvic area. And so in terms of pain, and pain is different for every woman, you know, again, to sort of circle back to what we first started talking about, you've got like option one is like medication, like pain meds, or maybe synthetic hormones, maybe just like stopping the body from bleeding. Like, let's just stop the body from bleeding. That'll be fine. That'll work out fine for everybody until you need to have a baby. And then nothing works. And then, you know, if you take a more holistic approach, then it's about thinking about, and this is a slower, more time-consuming again process, because it's not going to happen instantaneously. It's about how can we reduce the inflammation that is occurring in the body through predominantly through nutrition, but not just through nutrition, like reducing inflammatory foods, which is going to slow down the autoimmune process in the gut. That will alleviate pain. That's one of the best things that you can do. It's not going to happen overnight, but it usually can happen within a couple of cycles. And then all of those other things that we've already talked about are also really supportive of that. And then in terms of like, and again, this is a good pain management process that's sort of really ancient and traditional, but way better than some of the more conventional things. Castor oil packs, I don't know if you're familiar with those, but yeah, they're really good as well, just to like place on the abdomen during that time. And they're actually apparently really good at breaking down some of the lesions, at helping them to break down. I don't think that they work completely to the exclusion of doing all the other really important supportive stuff. But, you know, again, like I think that's some of those more, you know, traditional things are way more effective than any of the more, you know, modern solutions to that pain.
It makes so much
sense. Be terrible for clients as well, like excruciating and debilitating. Some women have a lot of referred pain down into their legs and into their, some have it up into their chest and lumbar spine. And yeah, it can be super pervasive. So again, that's also a pretty motivating factor in terms of like doing what is required to make the changes to, you know, reduce that pain.
As you mentioned, like some individuals suffer that pain on a constant basis, and, you know, they feel challenged around that. And aside from then, you know, them ticking all the boxes and doing all the right things, like what would be the next best thing for them? Because if someone is, you know, holistically looking at their nutrition, the training, the mental health, or the supplementation, whatever it is, but the pain is still there, like what would you suggest then?
So typically speaking, it's pretty unusual for someone if they do like the proper anti-inflammatory. So the thing is with endo, lots of people do diets that are incomplete around supporting the endo. So you do need to go like quite strictly and remove like all of those inflammatory foods. It isn't an easy sort of process, but it isn't a long-term process. But if you do that, you should have a pretty significant impact in that pain. If you don't, and you are doing all of that stuff really well, then I would sometimes suggest going back to, so the only way that they can diagnose endo, I don't know if anyone else has talked about endo on the pod, or if you've, I'm sure you know this because I feel like you know lots about this stuff. The only way they can diagnose it is through laparoscopy surgery. So where they enter in via the belly button basically and go and firstly they just have a look, and if it's there, then they'll use various methods to remove it depending on the severity and where it's located. So very occasionally, say, this is my experience, if I've had a client and they still have some persistent pain, then I'll ask them to go, or we'll talk about it together, to go and have another investigative surgery. And sometimes there's just still lesions there that were probably there before that aren't going to just recede, although I have seen lesions recede, and that you just remove them, and then you're going to remove some of the source of that pain. And then if you're managing yourself well, then the likelihood of recurring pain after that will be less. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but really, other than just if that was to happen, other than doing that and managing it with medication, or I suppose CBD or something like that, if you wanted to, there really isn't any other solution. And so I think it is quite unsettling for endo sufferers, because it's like, it's this, you know, chronic debilitating thing that they really have to learn to manage for the rest of their life.
Yeah. It really like brings all of this into sight, because I do know a fair few people who have endo and they do suffer pains on I would say on a consistent basis. But now when I'm looking at their lifestyle, most of them are hard workers. They're stressed. They're probably not eating enough. And if they are eating, they're not eating the proper foods that, you know, they should be eating. As you mentioned, like having a anti-inflammatory diet is something that, you know, for endo sufferers to look into, because as you mentioned, it's inflammatory. So building more inflammation on the body is just going to make the pain even worse. So yeah, kind of makes sense why this is like a constant battle for some people.
And it's very common. I think it's like over 800,000 women in Australia. And I can't remember what the stats are. I think don't quote me, but I think it's like 1 in 6. So it's epidemic pretty much at this point.
Very common.
Yeah. And, you know, it's an autoimmune condition. So it's like something isn't working, like generally speaking, with what we're doing. That there's this, that there's PCOS, that there's like, you know, I think infertility, it changes all the time. I think it depends on which state, but I think WA is like 1 in 5 couples will experience infertility. So it's like, it's not this rare thing. It's like almost everybody is experiencing one of these things. So like clearly whatever we're doing, I mean, obviously we've highlighted some of this, it ain't working.
Yeah.
Needs to do some different shit. Yeah.
Yeah, something needs to change. And like, as we mentioned at the start, it's taking responsibility and going and making those changes instead of trying to find the quick fix, because too often when you do try to find the quick fix, it ends up backfiring and you end up taking 10 steps back knowing, oh God, I could have just taken the simple steps instead. And
the whole reason that I even embarked on this journey myself is for that exact reason. I was on the contraceptive pill since I was 15 because I had hormonal imbalance already and all these crazy health issues, and they just got worse and worse and worse. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s and I was obsessed with my health because it was whack, because it was like just not happening for me. And I started reading this amazing book by Christine Northrup called Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And then I was like, oh yeah, the pill, that's not a good idea. Why am I on that? So I decided to come off the pill, and I basically didn't menstruate for a decade. So I didn't have a period for an entire decade. And during that time, I was searching for answers. I saw every medical professional. I saw every gynecologist. I had every type of procedures, D's and C's and ultrasounds and all of them. And they were just like, don't worry, love, you're infertile. Just come back when you need to have a baby. We've got medication for that too. And I was like, no, that's not right. And I'm not having a period, and that's not right. And it was literally not until I came across Paul Chek's book, How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy. And I started reading that and going, oh, wow, this is really simple, but makes a whole lot of sense. And I started applying all of that my cycle returned and eventually returned to a 28-day cycle. And that's literally what sort of sparked my desire to work with women, work with nutrition and lifestyle, because I healed myself. So I was like, okay, if I can basically go from them telling me I can never conceive to having a perfect 28-day cycle and conceiving the very first month that I tried at 39, then I can definitely just help other people with this.
100%. I'm so glad that you mentioned his book as well, because I've read it multiple times. Mind you, I actually met him in real life, and that was probably at the start of my coaching career. Oh my God, we're going back 10 years now. Wow. And I just remember I was girl fanning so hard when I met him. I was like this young 20-year-old girl, and he would have been in his already like
He would have loved that, Ziggy.
yeah, he probably would have, but that's
Loves
okay.
ladies.
But like to your point is I didn't know much about his book. I knew more about his style of training, his functional
Yes.
movements. It was the kettlebells and the free weights and so forth. And I think that's what inspired me a lot to do around the health and fitness, not till I read his book. And I was just like, oh, wow, like there's more to this. There's other concepts that you can follow. It doesn't have to be so hard by what people are telling you it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's quite simple, like the principles in his book. It's not, it's not radical by any stretch or complicated, but it's funny because like even with the sleep stuff, like I think I would have read his book. I started my coaching business in 2012. I probably read his book in like 2000 and maybe 7. So I was doing, this was because of him. And for him, he was teaching that for over a decade before I started doing it, all the sleep hygiene stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like crazy town stuff in the eyes of literally everyone. And it's only in the last 5 years or so where that has become the norm with the blue blockers and with, Matthew Walker and with, all of the biohackers like getting on board and making that a cool thing, There was nothing about that. And he was totally trailblazing that like decades ago.
I'm laughing over here because I've geeked out on Matthew Walker's book for multiple times, and I love using blue blockers. And I remember a few weeks ago I was on a date and the guy pulled out Matthew Walker's book, and I was just like, oh my God, I like you even more now because you're into sleep. Oh, it's just funny. But as you mentioned, like these professionals, they're not reinventing something extravagant or hard. It's just like, it's so simple, so basic. Yet so many of us are holding back from actually just making the most simplest change. It's like turning your internet off or putting some blue blockers or, having candlelight at the house instead of actually having your lights on all the time. It's just like getting some sunlight, like it's so simple.
It is. It's really simple. But, we're so addicted to our devices. We're addicted to the technology. We're addicted to the validation. We're addicted to our habits and routines. And so even though it is really simple, it's actually also really effing hard for a lot of people to do that stuff. And I reckon sleep is the point of most resistance for most people, especially young people.
I will actually disagree. Also for older people too.
Oh yeah. I mean, probably for just everybody, right?
You know what? It's funny. I absolutely love my sleep. And to be honest, when I was younger, I barely slept. I was during even high school, but like uni, and then just when I was like in my early 20s, I barely slept. I was out and about. I was a rebel. I was drinking. I was smoking. I was taking drugs. I was just like, this is living. But to be honest, when I got to my mid-20s, I was just like, oh God, this is not living. My body hates me. And that's when I started making those changes. And yes, sleep is quite difficult for people. As you mentioned, they're stuck on those devices. Whether it's the validation or wanting more information or like flicking through videos. Yeah, again, I can't remember where I saw this. There was a study saying that it's getting worse with the younger generation now as well.
I can see that. I mean, they're going to be plugged into it somehow. So I don't know what we do about that, but yeah, everyone also needs to read Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, definitely.
100%. Yes. Oh my God, we're giving so many recommendations.
I know. Like, also work with us, but like,
exactly.
We're all good.
Bit of a plug over there.
We're the aggregators of all the information. So,
literally, like, we've been through this. Like, it's funny because I was actually going to ask you to share an empowering story of like examples of individuals, but you literally did. Like, you are the example of what we've been talking about. We're like, this is how we've been changing our lives. We realize how stupid we are.
Yeah,
we were by doing all those things, and now we've literally done a whole 360, and we're living and breathing this lifestyle and helping other women do the same.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you just like came to it like a little bit earlier than me, so lucky you.
Go me.
Go you. Oh wait, no emojis.
No emojis today. Sarah, I want us to finish off with today's conversation about how to increase more of this awareness around women's health, and maybe another insight of the extension of what we've been talking about today for our listeners.
How to increase awareness. Again, I feel like I'm really happy with the level of awareness around, well, particularly endo. I feel like that has blown up. Like, that is trending right now, which is great. But where we are lacking is in that understanding. It feels like a full circle moment in terms of where we started this pod to where we are now. I really feel like there is a lack of awareness amongst women around all of the things that are contributing to hormonal imbalance, infertility, chronic health issues of any description, most of which do involve hormones in some capacity for the women. I feel like it's just too easy, or it's promoted too much in the mainstream, that the easiest, fastest, best solution is go talk to your GP, follow the route of specialists from there, rather than, and I don't know if this was the question, but I don't know what the solution to that is. I think it is just people like us, and podcasts and platforms like this that do allow women to share or to experience alternative options.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's just so important, because if you watch any fertility expert talk about endometriosis, it's like, there's definitely no cure. It's a disease. There are treatments. Contact your GP. Like, that is it. So, thumbs up, gold stars for awareness, but really we've got a lot of work to do about like how we can actually manage ourselves and literally solve anything just by doing the things that we've talked about in this pod today. There was another question, and there was another question at the base of that, and I can't remember what it was.
The awareness and the insights
from today.
Yeah.
I feel like we sort of wrapped that all up really nicely. That covered it. That we need to just come back to ourselves and come back to the basics. And I suppose, again, to circle back, like, what we've been told is the representation of fit and healthy is not really synonymous with health.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, your perception of health and fitness is what's wrong with the health and fitness industry.
Yeah.
Had to be said, had to be done. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of like light bulb moments for a lot of women listening to this going, okay, I need to put my big girl pants on and make a few changes, because if not, the struggle is just going to continue or worsen as well.
Yeah, definitely. And, before, fertility starts way before you're even thinking about having a child. It starts years before that. So if you are at all thinking that you want to have a baby in the future and you're young, then start really thinking about all of the things that we've talked about in today's pod.
Yeah, start doing now. This is your best chance. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year.
Yeah.
Now.
Start nourishing, like start doing sleep hygiene, start managing stress, CCing, you know, like do all of the things that you need to do to really support the body.
Yeah, definitely. I love everything about all of this conversation. Sarah, thank you so much for jumping on today's podcast. I know a lot of our listeners are going to get immense value from what we've spoken about, and we'll share your information in the show notes so then they can reach out to you on Instagram and your website. And girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us, and let us know what you think.